He didn't need a badge or a uniform. All the feared leader of the ironclad Hounds needed was one look at a bruise, and the entire town of Maple Ridge learned what real power looks like. The air in Juniper Creek was usually thick with the scent of pine and apathy, a small, forgotten logging town that had slowly hollowed out over the past 2 decades. The main street was a collection of faded clapboard storefronts, and the only place that seemed to maintain any semblance of life was the Copper Kettle, a greasy spoon diner perched at the edge of the forest. This was where the world, if it bothered to stop, would momentarily intersect with the town's quiet despair. It was into this silence, just past noon, that the ironclad Hounds arrived. The sound was not a simple engine noise. It was a guttural, earth-shaking thunder, a roar that scraped the rust off the old town sign. A line of custom-built choppers, polished chrome winking defiance in the meager sunlight, pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of the Copper Kettle. The air immediately grew heavy, charged with a potent mix of exhaust fumes, leather, and unspoken authority. Their leader, Cade Breaker Thorne, swung his leg over his low-slung Harley like a man shedding a heavy cloak. Cade was a legend, a name that echoed in back alleys and across state lines. He wasn't just the president of a prominent motorcycle club, he was a force of nature, a man whose face looked like it had been molded with grit and shadow, his formidable frame sheathed in black leather. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, swept over the town with a cold, practiced indifference. People didn't whisper about Cade, they just got out of his way. If you believe that the darkest pasts can hold the brightest futures, that redemption isn't a one-time event, but a continuous journey, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Redemption Road, where we chronicle the moments that change a life forever. Inside the diner, the clatter of cutlery and the idle chatter ceased as if a switch had been thrown. The regulars, a scattering of grizzled loggers and worn-out retirees, froze mid-bite. The waitress who met the bikers was named Ilara. She was perhaps the only delicate thing in Juniper Creek, with a quiet grace that seemed utterly out of place. Her apron was immaculately clean, her movements efficient, but her eyes held a depth of exhaustion that went beyond a simple lack of sleep. She couldn't have been older than 25, but she carried the silent weight of a woman twice her age. Cade watched her. He didn't look at her with the leering interest his younger members sometimes displayed, but with an unnerving, laser-like focus. As Ilara brought the first round of coffee, her hand momentarily brushed the collar of her uniform. The gesture was swift, almost imperceptible, but Cade was a man who noticed everything. He had survived too long on the road to miss the small tremors of fear and concealment. Beneath the collar, where the uniform met the neck, Cade caught the distinct, jagged edge of a scar. It wasn't the kind of scar that came from a childhood fall. It was a rough, reddish line, poorly healed, the kind of mark that told a story of violence, not accident. It stirred a dormant, agonizing memory within him, the kind that lay just beneath his thick skin, a constant, dull throb he usually managed to ignore. Ilara kept her gaze fixed on the table, her smile a brittle shield. When she leaned in to take their orders, a heavy antique silver locket she wore slipped out from under her shirt. As she quickly tucked it away, Cade saw the fleeting image engraved on its surface, a tiny, laughing girl with pigtails. "I'll take the special," Cade rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly sound that seemed to vibrate through the booth. Ilara simply nodded, her eyes still downcast. For the rest of the meal, Cade was quiet, a granite centerpiece amidst the boisterous laughter of his club. He ate mechanically, his focus entirely on the rhythm of Ilara's work. He watched her flinch when a plate clattered too loudly. He noticed the way she avoided the kitchen door whenever it opened, and how her entire body tensed when the diner's manager, a man named Silas, the grip, Vance, emerged. Silas was a big man, built like a fire hydrant, his face a perpetual scowl set beneath a slick of cheap pomade. He wasn't just the manager, he owned the diner, the only working gas pump in town, and, essentially, the last shred of opportunity for anyone desperate enough to stay in Juniper Creek. When he spoke to Ilara, his voice was always a low, venomous hiss, just loud enough to sting, but never loud enough to draw outright attention. The interaction that broke Cade's hard-earned indifference happened near the counter. Silas was leaning against the cash register, counting bills, his dark eyes following Ilara as she wiped down the counter. He said something that made her shoulders slump instantly. As she tried to move past him, he deliberately shifted his considerable bulk, blocking her path. When she tried to squeeze by, he didn't move, but instead let his hand fall and rest, a touch that was both a caress and a threat, on the small of her back. Ilara froze. She didn't shout, didn't push him away. She simply whispered, "Please, Mr. Vance." Silas clattered, a dry, rasping sound, and finally moved, leaving a visible tremor in Ilara's posture. Cade's jaw tightened, the muscle twitching beneath his beard. He saw the cold calculation in Silas's eyes, the possessive cruelty, and he saw the resignation in Ilara's. It was the look of someone trapped not just in a job, but in a prison of debt and fear. He knew that look. It was the same hollow resignation he'd seen in the eyes of his younger sister, Lily, years ago before she'd made a desperate choice to escape an abusive partner and ultimately had failed. The guilt of that failure was the ghost Cade carried everywhere, a relentless rider on his back. That night, the ironclad Hounds set up camp at the abandoned sawmill outside town. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the faces of hardened men. They drank, they laughed, they talked of the road, but Cade sat apart, nursing a bottle of whiskey that did nothing to dull the sharpness of his memory. He kept seeing the faint, angry line on Ilara's neck. He kept hearing the whispered, "Please." He had always believed his life was a wreckage, a cautionary tale of bad choices, but he had promised himself, the night he buried Lily, that he would never again turn a blind eye to the quiet pain of the innocent. "Something bothering you, Prez?" asked Viper, Cade's second in command, a wiry man with the speed of a striking snake. Cade didn't look up. "Just bad memories, Viper. They travel farther than any highway." He knew what he had to do. The ironclad Hounds were built on loyalty and a savage code of justice, their own justice, and sometimes justice needed a loud, heavy boot. The next morning, the roar returned to Juniper Creek, not with a casual rumble, but with a deliberate, low, threatening growl. The bikes lined up not just in the lot, but along the street, their sheer numbers casting the diner into shadow. Ilara was there early, her face pale. She saw Cade sitting alone at a booth, a fresh cup of coffee before him. She approached with a hesitation that was palpable. "Morning, sir," she managed, her voice barely a breath. Cade looked up, his expression unreadable. "Tell me about Silas Vance, Ilara." The directness of the question made her recoil as if struck. She shook her head desperately. I don't know what you mean, sir. He's my boss." "He owns this town," Cade stated, his voice quiet, steady, yet utterly final. "And he thinks he owns you. That scar on your neck, the way you flinch, the locket you hide, it all tells me a story I know too well." Tears sprang into her eyes, not tears of pity, but of terror, the terror that comes when your deepest secret is laid bare. "Please just leave." "I can't. If he finds out—" "He's not finding anything out, he's just leaving." Cade cut in, his gaze fixed on the kitchen door. Just then, Silas Vance strode out, his hands on his hips, a smirk already forming on his face. He'd seen the Hounds arrive and was ready to assert his dominance over these out-of-towners. "What's the meaning of this commotion?" Silas barked, his eyes finding Cade. "You boys done eatin'? Time to move your scrap iron off my property." Cade rose slowly. It was a movement of deliberate, terrifying power. He didn't rush. He simply unfolded his imposing frame until he towered over the manager. Behind him, the ironclad Hounds silently filled the diner's entrance, their leather jackets a solid wall of black. Every one of them was standing, their eyes fixed on Silas with cold, professional menace. "She doesn't work for you anymore," Cade said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "And who the hell are you to say that? She's got an